Hey everybody, we are returning to talk about the Feasts of Yahweh, God's prophetic calendar that reveals Jesus' first and second coming. It's a beautiful time to learn about these. And let's jump right into the Sabbath, the rhythm of rest and rule. The first feast that is commanded in Leviticus 23. So before God gave Israel a single feast day on the calendar, he gave them one every week, a sacred rhythm, a divine gift. And Sabbath is not about checking out, it's about checking into his presence, checking into his rest, and checking into his rule, spiritually and physically. So you might ask yourself, what is the Sabbath? And the first mention of the Sabbath is in Genesis 2, verses 2 to 3. The Hebrew means to cease and to rest. The Strong's Concordance number is H7676. And it is the first moed, or appointed time, listed out in Leviticus 23. It says, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is a Sabbath and solemn rest, a holy convocation. And that's in Leviticus, but the Sabbath predates the Mosaic and Levitical covenant. It originated in creation. So a lot of people are like, oh, we shouldn't, take on the Torah of Moses, being Gentiles. And I think there's some legitimacy to that, but the Sabbath is part of the Ten Commandments, and a lot of theologians agree that the Ten Commandments are still part of the New Covenant. So the Sabbath is a weekly feast. It's not optional, it's not cultural, it's a sacred rhythm of Yahweh, and we are invited into it. So you might ask, when is it? It's every seventh day, and on the biblical calendar, it's Friday evening to Saturday evening. Surprise, surprise, it's not on Sunday. The Sabbath is a weekly pause or an invitation to God, from God, in the world's chaotic busyness. It's a 24-hour window of rest, refocus, and connect. And we reset and we rest in his finished work at Calvary. We don't need to do anything more, but it's good to enter into his rest, like the book of Hebrews says. So, what did God command about the Sabbath? In Exodus 20, verses 8 through 11, it says, "Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. A day of no work, no striving. It's about trusting that God finished what he started." So you might ask yourself, did Jesus fulfill the Sabbath? And the answer is yes, since he fulfilled all the law in the Torah, as Matthew 5 says. In Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30, Jesus says, "Come to me and I will give you rest." And I believe this is the spiritual and eternal rest mentioned in Hebrews 4. Also in Mark 2, verses 27 and 28, the Bible describes Jesus as Lord of the Sabbath. It says, Sabbath was made for man, and the man was not made for the Sabbath. And I think this kind of illustrates that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, yet he also participates in it humbly as a human, when he was a human on earth. I still think he's a human in heaven, and I still think he's Jewish. He didn't lose his history when he died and resurrected. But anyway, he healed on the Sabbath, showing that it is about freedom and not legalism. There's actually no command in Torah that says we can't heal on the Sabbath. It just says don't do work, which is debatable if healing is work. The people in Jesus' day, the religious leaders, overcomplicated the Torah for sure, added a lot of their own interpretations and additions, which God says not to do. So let's get into Hebrews 4, verses 9 and 11. It says, there remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And it actually says in verse 11 to be diligent to enter into that rest. It's not a passive thing. And the Sabbath points to a greater rest, that is salvation and rest in His work and His kingdom. He is the king, and He makes the rules. So you might ask yourself, did Jesus keep the feast? And let's go to the Bible and see what it says. In Luke 4:16, it says, as was His custom, talking about Jesus, He went into the synagogue on the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, and being a first century Jewish rabbi, that would have been Saturday, not Sunday, like the church changed in history. So Jesus honored the Sabbath not as a religious duty, but as a relational rhythm to reconnect His body and His mind to God and His family. Luke 13, verses 10 through 17 says that Jesus healed on the Sabbath. And there's also another count of that in John 5, verses 16 through 18. Both of those are really interesting to read, some different details in each one. But now we know that Jesus kept the Sabbath. Did the apostles and the early church keep it? And the answer is definitely. To the first couple hundred years of the church, the Gentiles were participating in the feast days and observing Torah, and it wasn't until about 325 AD when the Council of Nicaea met and they decided to change the Jewish customs to pagan customs to make it easier for the Gentiles to convert. But ultimately, it was out of hatred and fear of the Jewish people. So, did Paul and the early church keep Sabbath? Let's look at Acts 13, verses 42 through 44. Paul preaches on the Sabbath in Antioch. Which would mean he kept the Sabbath. And Acts 17 verse 2 says, as was his custom, speaking of Paul, he went in and taught on 3 Sabbaths. So he was observing Sabbath for a whole month in that passage. And finally, in Acts 18 verse 4, says, every Sabbath he, being Paul, reasoned in the synagogue. So not only was he keeping Sabbath, he was visiting synagogues and preaching Jesus on the Sabbath, which is pretty awesome. So early believers didn't throw this out. They saw Jesus in the feast days. So, what is the personal and prophetic meaning today for us? The Sabbath is about resting in what God has done for us. It's about remembering who He is to us. and it's about realigning with heaven's rhythm that has been going since creation, literally. It's a weekly reset and a prophetic picture of the cross and the kingdom. Messiah's 1,000-year reign is called a Sabbath rest in a lot of Hebrew or biblical circles. The finished work on the cross is also demonstrated through the weekly reset and prophetic picture. We'll check out John 19:30 for that. And finally, a call to action. You were not made for burnout. You were made for beauty. God built rest into your DNA. We need it. Stop letting the culture dictate your schedule. Let Heaven reset your schedule. Begin with a Sabbath. Here's a couple simple steps you could take just this week to try. Why don't you try setting aside a 24-hour period? Doesn't necessarily have to be Friday night to Saturday night, although that is God's biblical time. But just a 24-hour period whenever you can. No cell phone, no work, no emails. Just take time with God and your loved ones. Eat a meal, light a candle, read scripture, rest, worship the King. Don't make it religious. Just make it relational and try to enjoy it. This isn't necessarily about following a set of rules. So, a quick recap. Sabbath is a weekly feast, and it is the first holiday or holy day or appointed time that Yahweh ever commanded or implemented. It points to creation, redemption, and even the future kingdom. Jesus fulfilled it and invites us into the greater fulfillment of it. You are invited to reclaim the Sabbath, not as law, but as life. So let me know what you think of the Sabbath in the comments. Let me know how you participate in the Sabbath, if you already do it. I'd love to hear some more ideas. And did you know that Jesus and the early church celebrated the Sabbath? Let me know in the comments. Thank you.